She's now the first woman to serve as mayor in the city of Jacksonville. Donna Deegan sounding excited that her time is here.
I'm really ready to get in and get going.
A new administration, along with a newly sworn-in city council. We're looking at what to expect in these first few weeks. Plus, the Supreme Court issues rulings on cases before the summer recess. Government law attorney Chris Hand breaks down the importance of watching the High Court. And as we celebrate America's birthday, we'll look at how to participate as a citizen. Our Hand on Government segment on This Week in Jacksonville. Welcome to July, and with the new month, a new group of leaders in Jacksonville city government. Donna Deegan just sworn into office as mayor, and government law attorney Chris Hand is joining us today. And for our entire show, we call this the Hand on Government segment. And Chris, you've been through this as chief of staff for Mayor Alvin Brown. What's been going on this past month since election in preparation for this day?
Well, Kent, you've heard the expression before, drinking from a fire hose. Well, the time between when a mayor is elected and when she or he is sworn in is more like drinking from a tsunami. Because remember, Donna Deegan was elected mayor on May the 16th. So there's really just about 6 weeks in between the election and the swearing in. And there's a lot of work that goes on during that transition period. One of the most important pieces of work is finding out and determining who your executive team is going to be. And Mayor Deegan announced that just a couple of weeks ago. But there's also a huge governing issue, which is beginning work on the city's now $1.6 billion budget. Because of a little bit of an issue in the way we structure elections here, a new mayor takes office on July 1 and then has to provide a proposed budget to the city council, in this case by July the 17th. That's an incredibly quick turnaround on a $1.6 billion, with a B, budget. And so Mayor Deegan and her team have been working very hard, I know, over the last 6 weeks, trying to get that budget in shape so they can make that presentation just over 2 weeks from now.
It might be a little off topic, but is that something that consolidated government Jacksonville should change, should maybe alter or adjust?
It's really not ideal from a governing standpoint, Kent, to have a situation where you have a new mayor take office on July 1st and then have to turn around a proposed budget of that size in 2 weeks. Also not ideal for new city council members. They're brand new to the city as well if they're not returning from a previous term. And of course, under the charter, it's ultimately their job to adopt a budget and a millage rate. So they have a very similarly compressed time frame in which to deal with this. That's why in the past, Kent, there have been suggestions about moving the city elections to the fall. For example, one proposal is move it to September and November of the odd-numbered year. That way a new mayor and a new city council are sworn in on January 1st, and they have more than 6 months at that point to make sure they put together a new budget, have their team in place, align that budget with their priorities. It would make a lot more sense from a governing standpoint, but that's not the law right now. So every 4 or 8 years, we do have this very short period of time for a new mayor and a new city council to deal with the next city budget.
So every candidate, and then they're elected, they say, hey, here's what I'm running on. Here's what I'm going to do. Day one, I'm going to... Well, what are some of the things that are the challenges and opportunities for Mayor Deegan and the new administration?
Well, I think one sort of positive aspect for her in terms of building her administration is she was clear during the campaign what some of her priorities were. For example, infrastructure. She talked a lot about the importance of the city of Jacksonville investing in infrastructure in the campaign. And as mayor, there's a lot you can do to address some of these infrastructural challenges, beginning with this budget. Remember, the budget's really in a couple of parts, Kent. There's the operational budget, which is known as the general fund, but then there's the capital budget, the infrastructure budget, which is known as the CIP, or the capital improvement program. I think one thing a lot of people will be watching as Mayor Deegan presents her first budget is what is in that capital improvements program that addresses some of the infrastructure issues that she identified during the campaign. Not just the sort of day in, day out infrastructure issues that people think about with city government, but she also addressed the unfulfilled promises of consolidation, the infrastructure pledges that were made more than 55 years ago when consolidation was passed, whether that's the conversion of septic tanks to central sewer, the installation of sidewalks, the lighting of roads, and a variety of other issues. She talked a lot about the importance of fulfilling those promises, serving underserved neighborhoods in Jacksonville with infrastructure. So that CIP, that first CIP, and of course the three that followed during this term she's going to be, her first term as mayor, will be very interesting to watch to see how they build that capital improvements program to address a lot of these infrastructure issues.
One of the things we noticed early on, a few weeks before she's sworn in, she names who's going to be on her kind of executive staff.
Right.
What were your takeaways from that? And the people she named even creating a few new positions here?
Sure, and I think that's every mayor's prerogative to design a mayoral staff that kind of aligns with their priorities and, carries out the various functions that mayor feels are important. This is a mix of people who are community leaders and also folks who have been experienced at City Hall. For example, Karen Bowling, who's the new chief administrative officer, was a colleague of mine in the Brown administration, so comes with a number of years of city government experience. Mayor Deegan's also reached out across party lines. You saw that Mike Weinstein, who served multiple mayoral administrations, is helping as the kind of initial chief financial officer in the administration. But then he's being succeeded by another well-known community leader, Anna Brochet, who is a former city council president, is an accountant by trade. And so it was, I think, a mix of people who are community leaders, who are public servants, even people who had been members of the media. Obviously, Melissa Ross, who was the host of First Coast Connected, WJCT, is going to be leading the mayor's strategic initiatives and also serving as a press spokesperson for the administration. So it was a diverse group of executive leaders, and they will obviously, start their work now. And again, really beginning with that budget.
Chris, I want to turn to another component of city government, the 19-member Jacksonville City Council. I had the honor of serving as master of ceremonies for this year's installing of council and 2 constitutional officers who were sworn in. So what are Council President Ron Salem's priorities for his year as legislative leader? And then I guess, Chris, how does this council look different from the last one?
Well, it's very interesting. It's a different council to begin with because so many of the council seats are drawn differently than the last one. As we know, there was a redistricting lawsuit in which the federal court imposed a new council map just days before qualifying began. So the individual, remember on our council, Kent, we have 19 council seats, 14 are individual district seats, 5 are at large. Well, those 14 district seats look somewhat different than the past council because of the effects of that ruling. So it's a council that is going to be a bit of a new look council. And in that ceremony where you were the MC, Council President Salem laid out a variety of priorities. One, he said, and this goes back to the subject of infrastructure, talking about moving the Duval County Jail, which right now occupies what some would call prime real estate in downtown Jacksonville. And there's been some suggestion about moving that. That's a potentially expensive proposition, but one that people have talked about for years. He also talked about ways to program money the city of Jacksonville is getting from the opioid settlement in which it participated, and talked about setting up a public service grant type program for that. He's also previously been focused on the issue of solid waste, one of the most basic functions of city government. How do we pick up the garbage? And talked about wanting to try and make sure the city of Jacksonville was doing the best job it could in that area as well. What you see there, Kent, is some alignment potentially with the Deegan administration, particularly on that subject of infrastructure. And I know we're talking about that word a lot this morning, but that is going to be a dominant word over the next 4 years, not just because of some of the infrastructure priorities of Mayor Deegan and Council President Salem, but also because of that huge piece of infrastructure sitting out there that's going to have a lot of debate, Everbank Stadium, and how that gets renovated. That'll be a big sort of piece of both the next mayorship and next council, figuring out how the city and the Jacksonville Jaguars partner on that project.
I'm going to take one extra minute in this segment before we move on, but we're still really in the honeymoon phase here. These new council members, they're getting their footing. So is the new administration and the mayor. What do we? Does this really set the tone? This first month, 90 days, what have you, for how council and the administration will work together?
Beginnings are always very important, Kent, because, I mean, for a variety of reasons. One, it does give a new mayor and a new council a chance to sort of set the narrative and build the culture in City Hall, and has a big impact on what the next 4 years can look like, and also on what those working relationships can look like in City Hall going forward. So these beginnings are important. That's why an inaugural address is important. It sort of helps communicate to the public what the values and the priorities of the new mayor are. Also sets benchmarks benchmarks by which the administration and others can be viewed by the public over time. So these beginnings are crucial, and making the right investments in building relationships, finding ways to work together, and also how a mayor and a city council relate and connect with the community and the citizenry. What happens in this, these first few months can be very impactful for the next 4 years.
And I will tell you, at that installation ceremony and some of that beforehand, and there was a reception afterwards, you did see a lot of these elected leaders saying and doing the right things. I'm looking forward to working with you. We haven't met yet. I can't wait to. So we're hearing some of those things that would offer some hopefulness, I think, for all of us in the region on what's going to happen here. All right, stay with us, Chris. And, in just a couple of days, it's Independence Day in the United States. Maybe happy birthday, America. And we want to talk about using your rights as a citizen. So stay with us on This Week in Jacksonville.
You're watching This Week in Jacksonville with Kent Justice.
Chris Hand is with us for our monthly segment called Hand on Government. Now, America's celebrating 247th birthday this week. So you're a co-author with former Senator Bob Graham. The book is called America, the Owner's Manual. This is something you're passionate about, helping people understand how to participate in local government. What does it mean to you? What's this opportunity when we celebrate Independence Day as a nation and look at that, the rights that we have as citizens?
Well, again, there are so many reasons to celebrate July 4th and, as you say, 247th anniversary of our nation being founded. But I think one of those is something that maybe has been unique to the United States throughout its history, which is the freedom to use our effective citizenship skills and help move government in our direction, to help make sure that elected officials and appointed officials respond to our hopes and concerns. And though there's certainly a lot of public opinion data out there that suggests that people are skeptical about their ability to do that, it's very important people remember that they do have effective citizenship powers, and if they use them to engage with government, engage with elected officials, they can help to achieve some of the results they'd like to, as they're dealing at every level of government. I think one thing that's really important for people to keep in mind is, when Senator Graham and I have both talked about this, one of the messages we share is that everybody has the most important title in American democracy. And some people might think, well, hang on, I'm not a president, I'm not a senator, I'm not a governor. We don't have to be, because the most important title in American democracy, the most important role, is that of citizen. And each of us has a set of citizenship skills, and Senator Graham and I write about that in America, the Owner's Manual, and also share the examples of citizens who have used those skills to move government in their direction. We have those skills, and we just use them. We engage with elected officials. We make our voices known. We can be effective in shaping government at every level, but particularly at the local level, the one that's the closest to us.
I'm thinking about this. Ben Frazier passed away just this last week. Ben was an activist, and he was someone who maybe that's not the model for everyone in participating, but certainly he was someone who said, agree with me or don't, I'm going to make my voice heard to my local government officials so that the discussion at least can be had.
Well, Ben Frazier was certainly an example of effective citizenship, and one of his kind of last acts as an effective citizen really changed Jacksonville government and politics for the next decade, if not longer. He was one of the plaintiffs who went to city council, urged them to change their redistricting maps, believing that it didn't conform with the 14th Amendment to the United States Constitution, ultimately ended up filing suit and winning that federal court case we talked about earlier in the show. Ben Frazier was one of the leaders in that effort, and there were many others who were involved with that. But that act, that series of acts, Kent, going and petitioning city council, persisting, even though that didn't work, to then move on to the court phase to encourage the federal court to kind of redraw those maps consistent with their position. That was all kind of part and parcel of effective citizenship and a variety of the citizenship tools we have. I think it's really important. I think one of the best things ever said about citizenship is from former Illinois governor and UN ambassador Adlai Stevenson. And what he said is, as citizens of this democracy, we are the rulers and the ruled, the lawgivers and the law-abiding, the beginning and the end. And, it's not enough to have the title. We actually have to use those citizenship skills, engage with government, figure out who in government can help us solve our problem, and use those citizenship skills to help them see the wisdom of our position and hopefully change course or continue on a course that we agree with.
So it starts, if you're an eligible voter, by voting.
Yes.
But there are steps beyond that that contribute.
Well, that is certainly the most fundamental form of effective citizenship. And, unfortunately, in the two city elections we had this year, we had relatively low voter turnouts, both, in both cases, in the second election and the 30%, actually even less than that in the first election. So I think that's where citizens ought to consider starting, making sure they're registered to vote and voting in every election, because that's the most fundamental form of effective citizenship. But that's not the only one. First, defining your problem. What is the problem that you're looking to solve? Making sure it's not so big or so small, but making sure it's kind of that Goldilocks solution, kind of just right in terms of the size of the problem. Doing your homework, making sure you've identified the level of government that can solve your problem, and then taking the steps necessary to persuade the decision maker. So when I talk to people about citizenship and this great freedom that we're celebrating on July 4th, Ken, I say, think about, the world around you. Is there a problem in your neighborhood or your community? Is your local park not being cleaned up? Has your street not been paved? Is there something else just in your community that you're concerned about? Take that concern and turn it into effective citizenship. Contact your local city council person, if it's an educational issue, your school board member, and work from there. But you can and will move government in your direction if you just remember you have those effective citizenship skills and you make sure to use them.
All right, thank you, Chris. So we're going to continue talking with Chris Hand here in our Hand on Government segments today. So here's the question. What's the impact of the highest court in the land? Chris and I are going to talk about the Supreme Court of the United States. That's coming up next on This Week in Jacksonville.
You're watching This Week in Jacksonville on Channel 4.
Chris Hand is with us for Hand on Government. We sit down with this government law attorney once a month to talk about things in the federal, local, state level. And so, Chris, so every year in June, end of June, we see the Supreme Court release sometimes a lot of rulings before they start their summer recess. Guide us a little bit here. We know that if we look at the end of June, what is the High Court going to tell us? What have you been watching that the High Court has talked about or ruled on this month?
Well, Kent, while the court releases decisions, of course, throughout the year, remember they start meeting kind of the first week of October and then proceed through the end of June. While they release decisions throughout the year, typically you see some of the most impactful decisions come at the very end of the term, kind of the last couple of weeks of June. And we've already seen that, here as we've kind of reached the end of the court's term. Just in the last couple of weeks, the court, and some of these have been surprising to court watchers. The court issued an opinion which reinforced the Voting Rights Act, which makes sure that every citizen has the right to effectively cast a vote in this country. And they ruled, they tossed out a congressional redistricting done by the state of Alabama, saying that it had not specifically or effectively protected the rights of black voters to cast ballots in that state, and ordered the redrawing of that map. That was a surprise to some, and that they reinforced the Voting Rights Act, particularly Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act. There was another decision that a lot of people who who follow elections in general had been watching. This was a North Carolina case in which some had posited the theory that state legislatures had unfettered authority to regulate or oversee federal elections. And there was some concern that if that theory was adopted by the court, that could cause a lot of uncertainty going forward as we regulate elections. In a 6-3 vote, the court rejected that theory, saying that state legislatures were subject to judicial review by the courts on that
Was that
issue.
somewhat surprising, the way that turned, or the way that ruling came?
I don't know that the ruling itself was surprising. And again, it was a 6-3 vote with kind of a coalition of both conservative and more progressive members of the court joining on. But it was one that was very closely watched because of the potential implications of that decision. There at the time we're taping this broadcast, Kent, there are still a couple of big decisions pending.
And I would point, we're still waiting to, there's a decision on affirmative action and the student loan plan, right?
Well, that's what I was just going to, right, that these are the two sort of big, I mean, there's several still pending, but two that, that by the time this show is airing, our viewers will probably have a pretty good sense of how they've been decided. One, there was a challenge to college admissions processes and whether or not colleges and universities are allowed to consider race in any way as part of the admissions process. There was a decision in the late 1970s that originally addressed this issue that's been the law of the land for, now for 45 years. The court is now revisiting that issue, and we'll have a sense of where they stand. And of course, another educational issue, that's President Biden's student loan elimination plan, which would for up to $20,000 for more than 40 million Americans could reduce the amount of their student loans. His decision on that was challenged. The court is obviously going to tell us, and has probably by the time that this broadcast is occurring, what their decision on that is as well. Think about the issues we've just talked about, Kent, whether it's the basic right to vote, elections, the issue of kind of college admissions, and ultimately student loans. These are issues that affect every single one of us, or many of us, in one way or another. And so the work of the court is exceptionally impactful, which is why, I think even for people who don't happen to be attorneys and need to follow the court occupationally, it's always a good practice to follow them overall, because the decisions they make can have profound impacts on our day-to-day lives.
Buck stops here when you're talking about the legal system and what we hear from Washington, D.C. and the Supreme Court. Chris, I appreciate it. It's something that I wasn't necessarily following very rigorously until I got to a point in my life where, oh, that impacts me whenever those decisions are made. Chris Hand, appreciate your time in our Hand on Government segment.
Thank you so much, Ken.
All right, well, This Week in Jacksonville airs each Sunday morning at this time. And this month, we're going to have the new CEO at UF Health at Jacksonville join us, what Patrick Graham wants to accomplish in the community. We're also inviting each member of this new city council to share their priorities. I'm Kent Justice. Thanks for watching on air on Channel 4 and the CW17. And then you'll find us online at news4jax.com or streaming on news4jax+. And be sure to subscribe to my weekly This Week in Jacksonville newsletter. Real bonus for News4Jax insiders. You head to news4jax.com/newsletters and sign up.
See why every day more people are choosing News4Jax, Northeast Florida and South Georgia's #1 source for local news.